Starmer's government is at a pivotal moment. It's already got through its first few months, and it needs to know where it's going next. And the Prime Minister has pushed forward with significant reforms, but he faces mounting internal resistance over welfare cuts and economic restraints and constraints, and ministers have expressed concerns over proposed reductions in public spending, with Starmer and Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, holding firm to strict fiscal rules. And as the information came out this morning, Rachel Reeves has got egg on her face. The administration's determination not to increase borrowing has put it in direct conflict with MPs advocating for a more expansive approach akin to Germany's recent relaxation of borrowing rules. This has sparked tensions within the Labour ranks, as some feel that Reeves's approach forces Labour into even harsher fiscal conservatism than the previous Conservative government. Yet, in the middle of these economic and political battles, Starmer has made a crucial and, in my view, correct decision, the abolition of NHS England. And this move, long overdue, advocated by policy experts such as those at the Tony Blair Institute, as well as myself over the past 2 years, represents a necessary step in tackling the bureaucracy that has stifled the health service and the lead and the direction that has given to other bureaucrats across the UK. The bullying by bureaucracy has got out of control to the point where it's painful picking up the phone trying to talk to the bank or the telephone company or insurance, and all of them are at it. And even if you identify that they have behaved badly, they will then say, "Oh, well, you were condescending to our staff." Of course. If a business is wrong, you want to tell them that they are wrong, and when they bark controlling language over you, you want to tell them that it's inappropriate. And I'm afraid I do, and I will. And if that's condescending, I think it's justified. I don't like being cheated, and I don't like then being harangued by bureaucrats who think they have a right to be heard. They don't have a right to be heard. Their job is to deal with the customer. Their job is to answer the questions of the customer and to explain, maybe, why they've done something wrong. Of course, if I were at fault, it would be an entirely different matter. But NHS England, the inaccessibility of NHS England, like the inaccessibility of the Home Office, adds to the problem that we are being controlled by a tyranny of pen pushers who then expect... the most extraordinary thing that I had the other day was one of these people who has been caught out in a lie and bad practice, who in fact, to their credit, this company has actually offered me a £50 compensation, which comes out, of course, as a goodwill gesture. So recognising that they behaved badly, but in the conversations that I had with them, they said, I've talked, therefore they must be allowed to talk, even when what they're saying is wrong. And this is equality. Actually, equality isn't what we're looking for. What we're looking for at the very most is equity, or better still, freedom. Thatcher was quite right a long time ago, saying that equality is the enemy of freedom. Equality is communism. We're not looking for equality. What we're looking for is a recognition of our worth and a recognition of our effort and of our potential. That is equity, not equality. And the fact that I have said something doesn't mean someone else actually has the equal right, particularly when they have cheated me, to harangue me. They don't. And this is something that has grown up simply because we have too many bureaucrats who think they have control. They do, and they need to be put in their place. And I'm delighted that NHS England is being put in its place. Now, what this means about the people who are working there, I'm not really very sure. And I think that's going to take a long time to ease out. I suspect many of them will simply be moved to other positions in government departments. But the principle is there, that duplicated bureaucracy is unnecessary, and particularly bureaucracy that can be replicated by AI and by computer technology. We for too long, we have stalled in digitizing our services. And NHS England was born out of the 2012 Health and Social Care Act. It was intended to provide independent oversight, but it has instead become an unwieldy, bullying, expensive duplicate of what is already there, an administrative behemoth. And certainly when I talk to people who have been badly hurt by the NHS, it all comes back to NHS England and its bully boy tactics, its obsession with litigation, its obsession with silencing whistleblowers, though to blow a whistle is part of the NHS contract which everybody signs. If you see something wrong, you have to tell people. And when you tell people, your job is over, but not only that, you're dragged through the courts, your life is over. Sanity, in my observation, is pretty well over. And the dissolution of NHS England marks a clear departure from the inefficiencies that have plagued NHS management, and it represents a commitment to streamlining healthcare delivery. The next stage is to get rid of a lot of the trusts that run hospitals. That needs to go as well. They're often run by twits. And either they need to be run by people who know what they're doing, or better still, it needs to be centralized. Because we can't have a situation where you go to a hospital and your health is paused, your healthcare is paused, while bureaucrats try to find details from another hospital about your treatment and then ignore it. The challenges of this transition are significant. The process for NHS England will take up to 2 years and will see nearly half of NHS England's 15,300 staff made redundant, with the government anticipating costs of up to £800 million in redundancy payments. But these short-term costs are outweighed by the long-term benefits of reducing layers of bureaucracy, layers of unnecessary pen-pushing, allowing for a more direct allocation of resources to frontline healthcare services. Wes Streeting, as Health Secretary, has taken on the inevitable task of implementing these changes, and his leadership in this endeavour should not be underestimated. Indeed, in my observation, Streeting has emerged as one of the most principled figures in Starmer's government. His handling of the scandal only a few days ago involving Councillor Sam Gold, this former close colleague, demonstrates a level of decision and integrity rarely seen in government, and certainly not seen in government recently. Streeting's swift action, suspending Gold immediately upon learning of his arrest, calling for his resignation following his guilty plea, speaks volumes about his commitment to accountability. In an era where political figures often seek to distance themselves from scandal or obfuscate responsibility, Streeting's on-the-record condemnation, his on-the-record response, his immediate response, is refreshingly direct, and this integrity extends to his broader approach to NHS reform. He's acknowledged that simply throwing money at the NHS won't solve its problems. Structural change is required, and by integrating NHS England back into the Department of Health, he aims to eliminate redundancy and create a system where decisions are made with greater accountability. And this restructuring should empower local NHS providers, granting them more autonomy while reducing the top-down micromanagement that has hindered efficiency. However, the government's broader economic challenges persist. Rachel Reeves' insistence on maintaining strict fiscal discipline is being tested by rising borrowing rates and slower than expected growth. And the Office for Budget Responsibility has scrutinised welfare reform plans that Labour claims could save up to £6 billion a year, but these cuts are proving difficult for many MPs to stomach. They won't go ahead. The issue is politically fraught. Labour's identity has long been tied to welfare protection, and pushing through reductions, even under the guise of necessary reform, alienates core supporters. Moreover, there are clear signs that internal divisions within the party are deepening, and while Starmer has presented a united front with Reeves on fiscal policy, murmurs of discontent are growing louder. Some MPs argue that the refusal to loosen fiscal constraints is politically damaging and limits Labour's ability to invest in growth. Others worry about the electoral ramifications of being seen as implementing austerity-light policies. And Starmer's instinct to get all the bad stuff out of the way in the first year or so of his tenure might be a good idea. Maybe we're just going to have one problem after another problem after another problem, and then Labour is going to cruise easily into the next election for the next 4 years. I'm not sure that's a trajectory that can be assumed. Once a government starts doing things, it tends to continue doing things. It tends to get into a habit of doing things. And I think this habit of being nasty in the first few months will continue, despite the expectations that in the long term it's going to ease off. It won't. Events, dear boy, events. And this is the way this particular government behaves. And some MPs are arguing that the refusal to loosen the fiscal constraints is politically damaging, limits Labour's ability to invest in growth. Others worry that the electoral ramifications are being seen as inappropriate. And despite these economic and political pressures, the abolition of NHS England stands out as a rare moment of decision and clarity in Starmer's administration. It's a reform rooted in pragmatism rather than ideology. But we come back to this thing. The protests about Reeves and her fiscal policy, the murmurs of discontent. We can't say this often enough. So any reforms that are taking place need to be seen within the light of the growing misery of Labour MPs, who I think are not so much looking... If this was a Conservative Party, I would say people were looking at their next election. I think in the Labour Party there are many principled individuals, like Wes Streeting, who are looking at the backbone of their support and the expectations, the moral expectations that are part of their upbringing. That this is a party which is dedicated to workers and to people who are out of work, and to treat such people in such a cavalier fashion in the interests of finance is, I think many Labour MPs would conclude, irresponsible. So the transition which is ongoing at the moment, particularly with NHS England, will be interesting, because I think in microcosm this is what the Labour Party should be doing at the moment. And if this is seen to be effective, there'll be more of this and less of the knee-jerk Rachel Reeves fiscal overtures that don't work. If the NHS England change genuinely reduces bureaucracy and improves healthcare delivery, even if the transition is challenging, if it's executed well, it could set a precedent for public sector reforms on a broader basis. And behind all this will be the image of Wes Streeting. In this tumultuous landscape, Wes Streeting is a figure to watch. His approach to NHS reform, his willingness to take principled stands, distinguish him from his contemporaries. If he can navigate the difficult road ahead, learn how to hold office, he may well position himself as one of the defining figures of this government. and as a likely successor to Keir Starmer. For now, the challenge remains whether Starmer can balance fiscal discipline with meaningful reform, or will internal dissent and economic headwinds and the foolishness of Rachel Reeves derail his agenda. The next few months will be crucial in determining the trajectory of his premiership, and indeed whether Starmer, and more particularly Reeves, can remain in position.